Today's Research Impact Canada webinar. We'll start with a land acknowledgement. As we are not all gathered in the same space, we recognize that this land acknowledgement may not be for the territory you are currently on. We ask, if that is the case, that you take responsibility to acknowledge the traditional territory you are on and the current treaty holders. We recognize that many Indigenous nations have long-standing relationships with the territories upon which York University campuses are located. I'm in the Burlington, Ontario campus, which is also known as my dining room. That these campuses are located that precede the establishment of York. York University acknowledges its presence on the traditional territory of many Indigenous nations. The area known as Tekaronto has been caretaken by the Anishinaabe Nation, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, the Huron-Wendat, and the Métis. It is now home to many Indigenous peoples. We acknowledge the current treaty holders, the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. This territory is subject of the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant, an agreement to peaceably share and care for the Great Lakes region. I'll pass it over to Connie Tang to share this in French.
Oui, bonjour tout le monde. Alors, comme nous ne sommes pas tous réunis en même lieu, nous sommes conscients que cette reconnaissance des territoires ne s'applique peut-être pas au territoire sur lequel vous vous trouvez actuellement. Si c'est le cas, nous vous demandons de prendre la responsabilité de reconnaître le territoire traditionnel sur lequel vous vous trouvez et les titulaires actuels du traité. Nous reconnaissons que de nombreuses nations autochtones ont avec les territoires sur lesquels les campus de l'Université York sont situés des relations de longue date qui précèdent l'établissement de l'Université York. L'Université York reconnaît sa présence sur le territoire traditionnel de nombreuses nations autochtones. La région connue comme Tekaronto a été préservée par la nation Anishinaabe, la Confédération Haudenosaunee, les Huron-Wendat et les Métis. Elle est désormais le foyer d'un grand nombre de peuples autochtones. Nous reconnaissons les titulaires actuels du traité, la Première Nation des Mississaugas du Crédit. Ce territoire est soumis au traité de la ceinture wampum, en anglais Dish with One Spoon, entente définissant le partage et la préservation pacifique de la région des Grands Lacs. Merci.
Merci, Connie, et bienvenue à tous. Welcome, everybody. My name is Michael Johnny. I'll be hosting today. I work at York University. How do we know if research and knowledge mobilization will make a difference? What a fabulous teaser that is. We are privileged to have Marie-Ève Girard from the University of Ottawa and Professor Sarah Morton from the University of Edinburgh talk about their collaboration exploring the impact of research and knowledge mobilization. I'll certainly give them an opportunity to introduce themselves a little bit more, but a few final points. We will end at the top of the hour, the bottom of the hour if you're in Newfoundland and Labrador. We'll end at 1 o'clock Eastern time. I would also ask if we could please hold questions until the presentation is done. I will facilitate that through the chat room and share them with our presenters. Hope everybody enjoys this. It will be recorded and available on the Research Impact Canada website soon. Marie-Ève and Sarah, over to you, and thank you.
Hi, thanks very much for coming this afternoon. I'm Sarah Morton. I'm actually the director of a company called Matter of Focus and an honorary fellow at the University of Edinburgh. And I've been working a bit with Marie-Ève over the last few months to see how an approach that I've been building for a while could fit with some of the work she's been doing in knowledge mobilization in her unit at the University of Ottawa. So what we're going to do is I'm going to present. I apologize to any of you who came to my presentation at the Knowledge Mobilization Forums. There's some similarities, particularly in the first part. In the second part, there's a little bit more diversion. I'm going to just spend some of the time doing that. Then I'm going to ask Marie-Ève to say a little bit more about the work we've been doing together and how she sees it applying to what she's doing in her knowledge mobilization role and more widely in the universities. So I'm just going to start off by sharing my screen. And presuming everyone can see that. Is that good, Michael? Yes, I'm presuming
all good.
Otherwise. Okay. And I just wanted to start by saying a little bit more about myself and how I've come to this topic, which, you know, some people think the topic of how do we know if we're making a difference is a terrible one, but I think it's a really exciting one. I've been working in knowledge mobilization formally since 2001. I held a knowledge mobilization role at the University of Edinburgh before it was called anything like that. It wasn't even called knowledge exchange at that point. It was called a research liaison. And then I worked at the university, you know, through the impact case studies. I became a director of the research centre with responsibility for knowledge mobilisation. And, you know, we did a whole range of things across policy and practice influencing, co-production and traditional kind of research dissemination during those years. And I took a midlife PhD, which in Canada I know is fairly common, but over here it's quite unusual to, I'm based in Edinburgh, to take a midlife PhD, and people, you know, thought it was quite strange. But I suppose I got really interested in, okay, I'm doing all this knowledge mobilization work, and of course you all know it can be really exciting and interesting and engaging, and but do we actually know if it's making a difference? You know, and knowledge mobilization is a fairly young topic. It's not something that's got a massive long track record. So it's really thinking about, okay, well, let's try and learn more. So I looked at what is research impact and how can it be assessed? And then that kind of led to further, you know, the whole REF impact thing here in the UK, for those of you who don't know, is an assessment exercise on research impact that's compulsory and across the universities. And it kicked off in the middle of me doing this PhD. So I suddenly became very relevant in a much wider way. And then since then I've carried out 7 independent impact studies of various different initiatives, different parts of the world, different topics. So I suppose the starting point for today is that I really want research and knowledge mobilization to make a difference. And I put up these 2 pictures. You know, I really like working with people and helping them figure out, you know, what it is that they need in order, what knowledge, information, data, evidence they need to drive the changes that they seek. And I set up my company Metro Focus with a colleague to really try and help embed that way of working into organizations, so not just in the research impact field, but more generally. And I suppose what's interesting and why I wanted, you know, why we're having this meeting and why you've all come, I presume, is because it's actually really challenging to do this in a meaningful way. Like if it was easy, we'd have really cracked it by now, but it's quite a challenging thing to do. So what I want to talk about is a little bit more about why it is that really evaluating knowledge mobilization or research impact strategies is so difficult, and then kind of why and how I'm trying to do something about it. And I'm going to talk about our approach and this software tool, which I know is partly why I was invited today, which is called Outnav, and I give a couple of examples of Outnav in action, one of which is Marie-Ève's and one of which is something I've been developing as part of the way that we've been a research impact school that we've been running over the last while. So just to start up with some assumptions. So the first one is, you know, that we know that knowledge isn't taken up and used in a rational, linear way. You know, people used to think, okay, we'll give policymakers knowledge and then they'll be able to make these very rational decisions and they'll know what the right thing is to do. But what we've learned over the years from studying in this area is that people interact with knowledge from their own perspective, their own experience and their own context. And the picture here is my colleague, Catherine Rose, was involved in a massive sort of knowledge mobilization project at a health centre in the East End of London, and all kinds of people there interacting and learning about different sorts of ways that they were gathering and understanding different parts of their organisation. So we know it's not this simple process. And then the other thing that we've really learned over the years is that it's really about people. So, you know, research or knowledge on its own doesn't directly cause change. It can influence it and contributes to change in quite complex ways. And one of my favourite bits of writing about this is, I don't know if you've read, Gabby and LeMay have got a lovely paper called Mind Lines, and they actually observed that practitioners were more likely to act on research if they were told about it by someone else than if they read it themselves. So it was really about the people and the relationships and it being animated. And I'm sure you've all seen this in the work that you're doing in this area. So it's really difficult to understand, is it knowledge mobilization activities that contributed to change, or was it something else? How can we trace the effect of our work through different kinds and stages of change? And what about the contribution of other partners or other people who are in the system as well? So I suppose at the core of this is trying to separate this idea of attribution and contribution. And I can share at the end of this, I've written a paper which explains this in a bit more detail. But I suppose what we quite often find when we're trying to assess the impact of something, what we quite often find is people trying to put attribution models onto things that actually don't suit them. So the attribution model at the top of this slide is the classic sort of medical model, you know, that you take an aspirin or you take a paracetamol because you have a headache, and your body is a fairly closed system. So when your headache goes, you go, oh yes, it was the paracetamol that took away my headache. Yeah, so that's the classic model. But when we're working with knowledge and people and knowledge mobilization activities, actually what we do interacts with multiple other factors, doesn't it? The people, the place, other services, other, you know, the climate, everything about the particular situation. And the sort of problems that we tend to address in knowledge mobilization are complex problems. So it tends to be fast changing environments. Things are influenced in unpredictable ways by internal and external factors. So when we see an impact, it's very difficult to say there's a direct cause and effect. Instead, we say, okay, well, we can see how our work contributed to that outcome or that impact. But it's not like we put something in the slot and something else came out the other end. So really embracing contribution, I suppose, is the first step to really getting to grips with how do we know if we're making a difference in this field. So I suppose what my proposal is, what if we plan for the change that we want to see when we're doing research mobilization, when we're doing knowledge mobilization, when we're doing dissemination, anything around research uptake? What if we plan out, what do we want to see? What is it we're really trying to do? What if we specify exactly what we do and how we do those things? Because we know that process really matters here. And most people in this field, I find when I meet them, they really care about process. Like they know that it really matters that you engage people well, that you get the right people in the room, that you do things in a way that's inclusive to anyone who might need to be involved, that materials are tailored to specific audience. Like we're really good at the process, and it's really trying to think through beyond the process. So we really want to identify the people that we include and influence in different ways. And then the other thing is plan and collect feedback along the way, so that we understand how things are happening as they happen, as well as being able to tell a story of the difference that we've made. So the matter of focus process is really built on that idea. So we go through these 4 stages, which I'm going to explain in a little bit more detail. So first of all, we map context and outcomes. I'm going to explain how that is. Then we audit evidence and say, okay, well, how are we going to know if this is happening or not? And how are we going to fill the gaps? Then obviously we track progress, and we really believe in a sort of tracking as you go, reflecting and learning. And obviously ongoing discussion, reflection, analysis and reporting are really important within projects, but also between projects, so that we can start to learn as a community of knowledge mobilizers, and we can start to really build things that we know work well and start to really share that knowledge and do the job better. So to the first part of that, understanding context, we use this ISM model. It doesn't actually matter what you do to understand the context for any initiative, but it does matter that you do it, because what's been shown in the research impact literature really strongly over the last 20 years is that, you know, things vary hugely according to context, and that's at the macro level in terms of the kind of structures and the geographies, at the sort of meso level in terms of the institutions and the facilities, and at the micro level in terms of the actual individuals, the people in the room and their preferences. So this is an evidence-based model that we've adapted to use with projects that we work with. But so I suppose what's important is that you spend a bit of time thinking what's going on in the context for this work that's going to help us or hinder us achieve what we want. And by doing that mapping, it's a way of really situating the work in the real world and acknowledging all these other influences, rather than kind of, it's almost like fingers in the ears pretending it's not there. So it's a way of really bringing it to life, and can also be a way of helping identify risks and assumptions that you might want to be tracking or measuring as you go. And it can be a really strong foundation for kind of reviewing and reflecting on things that, you know, risks that might materialize and things like that. And then the second part of that we do in outcome mapping is we use these headings, not always exactly these headings, but usually these headings. We've spent a long time developing these very nice plain language headings that have got a lot of thought into them, that really build on contribution analysis. I don't know if you know that contribution analysis is invented by Canadians, but at the moment it seems slightly more popular in Scotland than it is in Canada. I don't know if that's the case, but because you know, over here in the UK, there's quite a focus on outcomes and things being commissioned against outcomes, then suddenly contribution analysis has a real place. So basically what this model does is it shows, it gets you to separate out your thinking to, okay, well, what difference do we want something to make? What do we want to be better for people or communities? You know, that's what we're all looking for when we're doing this kind of change work. And then go through a process of thinking, well, what do we do? What are the key activities? So in our case, with research impact, we'd be thinking about knowledge mobilization activities, usually, wouldn't we? Maybe co-production activities, maybe research dissemination activities, all those sorts of things. But then this model focuses very carefully on who the people are who are engaged and involved, and on this step, how they feel, which is reactions. And the reason these two are so important to us is that we know this people-based work, where it's really people who are at the heart of change, if we don't get engagement right, we don't get the right people involved in a really positive way where they feel they can make a contribution and they think, oh yes, this is for me, like, you know, their engagement is a positive thing, then we know these other things like people learning things or gaining things or doing things differently just aren't going to happen. If people walk away at this point and go, nah, I don't really trust you, or whatever it is, then we know that other changes don't happen. So our model is very much focused on these people-based changes. And then we think about what knowledge, attitudes or capacities or skills people get, what behaviours, policies or practice change, and then we kind of get to the logical step about what is better for people and communities. So some of you who might have read my paper, this is the reference to it here, I developed this, you know, research uptake, research use, research impact framework with these headings in that paper, and I suppose this is like the matter of focus version of these headings, if you like. I feel like in the years between then and now, we've kind of iterated it into a more plain language version. Although we do have both versions in the software. Some people prefer this formal version, but it's funny because we developed the plain language version and we thought, oh yeah, there'll definitely be some people who want a formal version. And we thought maybe like, you know, the Scottish Government or some of the more formal bodies. So far, there's hardly anyone, and including people like the Scottish Government. We did a big project with a Children and Young People's Collaborative, and they really liked the plain language headings. They felt it had really helped them get to grips with what they wanted to do. So we do this work of setting out, you know, setting out like a pathway to impact, you might call it, or a pathway to outcomes, using the headings in a number of ways. This is a real life, this is in the day pre-COVID days on the right there, where I was doing an outcome mapping workshop with the Global Kids Online team, which is UNICEF and the London School of Economics. They have a big program of work around children online. And so we had the fortune of being able to do a face-to-face outcome mapping workshop. And on the left here is this is our virtual version. So we do it with a virtual whiteboard and Zoom. So this is us doing it just at the beginning of the pandemic. These were our guinea pigs, Obesity Action Scotland. So we spend a bit of time really thinking through, well, how does this project fit the headings? So you can do it in quite a simple way on your desk with some post-its and just try and work it out, or you can do it in a really complex way. This is some work I've been doing in the Philippines with the city of Valenzuela, and they're mapping out all of their programs of work that contribute to ending violence against children. So it's really on a massive scale. So it's one of these things that's quite adaptable to different scales. It's obviously much easier at this kind of level when you're doing something quite discrete than it is at this massive level. So basically, by setting out an impact or outcome map or a pathway to impact, it really helps focus on what is the potential impact of this work. And you can also do it retrospectively and say, well, what was the impact of this work? What do we think the impact was? But it really helps to pull out what that impact is. It can provide a way of planning for it as well. If you do it at the beginning of a project, obviously it's a way of setting out, okay, this is how we think it's going to work. Let's test as we go. It's a great way of communicating about what matters to a project or initiative, because you can share that and say, this is what we're doing. This is why we think it's going to make a difference. And quite a few of our clients have particularly done that, like with people with lived experience. So young people are involved in a project, people with dementia, we've had some people being involved, various different people, as a very simple way of setting out what matters. it really provides this structure for thinking and learning about impact. So it makes us think, okay, well, these are the people we want to engage, and this is what positive engagement looks like. So how are we going to make sure we've got that? If we don't get it, how can we go back in and try and build it up over time? How do we really think about what we want people to take away from this project? And of course, it creates a framework for evaluating impact. So although the kind of headline for this presentation is about evaluation, it has all of these other benefits as well. And this approach works best. This is my tidier garden version as opposed to my messier garden version. I'm not sure, actually, I think I prefer the messier one. But anyway, it works best when it's really focused on the outcomes and impacts that matter to the project, to the people, to the setting, to the funders, whoever it is who's going to be engaged with it or who is engaged with it. It works best when there's some understanding of different levels of impact. So in our model, we very much separate out. So rather than having a big kind of group of levels of impact, we really separate out learning impacts from behavior change or policy or practice change impacts from higher level impacts. Most of these approaches work best when they include a theory or a model of impact. So I've put "we believe" in brackets there. So it's, well, we believe that if we run this kind of activity, it will engage these people. So let's say we believe if we do an arts-based approach, it will work well for these constituents of people we want to engage. We believe if we bring an economist into this project, it will help this company be able to deliver better. You know, you've got to have some sort of theory behind what you're doing, and we do have those theories. We don't always make them explicit. So it's really trying to make the model explicit. And this is the other place where I think there's a lot of learning, because actually if we start to hone in as a sector on what we believe works, we can start to test it and share it and really learn what works. It works best when it's taken account of the context, as I described earlier. And it works best when it has buy-in from key stakeholders. So normally we do outcome mapping, including key stakeholders, so that you can get everyone in the same place and they all agree, oh yeah, this is a good representation of what we do. The other thing about these pathways or outcome maps is they're great when they're used as working documents, because I'm sure some of you have been involved in theory of change work of one sort or another, or logic modeling, or those sorts of things. Quite often they're done and then they sort of get left behind and they're not really the guide to the work. So even though they might have been useful thinking at the beginning of the work, they're not actually being used in a meaningful way as the guide to the work. But it is challenging, isn't it? So we're trying to think about what types of use or impact are of interest, which might be driven by funders or by these kind of, accountability environments like the REF. Timing is really, really challenging, because you might get instant impacts, you might get ongoing impacts. There might be impacts after you're not even involved in the work. And that's definitely what I found when I've done these impact studies, all of those things going on. And obviously the longer the time since the activity, the harder it is for anyone to recall, you know, why they thought it made a difference, or why was the research important, or why did knowledge mobilization help them achieve those impacts. So it's very, very difficult. We know that context matters, but we're still really grappling with good context management tools. And then do you want to actually assess impacts, or do you want to set out what the potential impacts are and then say, well, look, we did these. So actually the logic is we should have these impacts, but it's not our job to assess them. So that's a big conversation. The whole thing about dealing with attribution and additionality. So how do we know that knowledge mobilization made a difference as opposed to other things, and what difference did it make? And then trying to get away from linear models. So although the setup of outcome maps, it looks linear, the whole idea of it is that it's a flexible model. It's not that this happens and then this happens, that there's a lot of circling around through the model. And then the other thing is, what is it you're trying to do? So there might be different stages of thinking about impact. So it might be you're trying something really innovative that you've never tried before. So you want to know, can this work? Like if we set out the intended outcomes, can we try it out and see, but collect early feedback and really build up a picture of what's going well? And then the whole, does this work? So, okay, we know, we just want to check our assumptions. We're going to try this again here. Is it going to work in a different place? The whole, is this working? So maybe there's a way of working you've done many, many times. You know it works well usually, but you want to just monitor to make sure it is working in this incident. And then of course, the how did this work? A lot of us are trying to share what difference we made for whatever reasons, to get more money, for stakeholders, for our own satisfaction. And so we want to do that. Then the next stage of working in this way is to collect data, evidence and feedback against the outcome map to really help to understand how change is happening. So what we would say is it would be like a patchwork quilt. This is the purple bit on the side. That's my patchwork quilt. It's not a very exciting looking one, is it? But a patchwork quilt of evidence tailored to the very specific situation which you find yourself. And then collecting that data in a thoughtful and purposeful way. So, you know, we run social media accounts and then we get stats off the back, but we don't just want all the stats, do we? We want to think about, well, what's going to help tell our story in the way that we need to tell it, with real clarity about what it will be used for. So, okay, well, we need this because of that. And then according to your capacity to actually use evidence. So, you know, there's no point in getting feedback forms back from an event and they just go in the drawer and they never get processed, and you're never really learning or doing anything from them, or running surveys that you don't have the capacity to analysis. And then of course, always being mindful of the reporting requirements for whoever you're reporting to. There's a couple of quick feedback examples. I mean, we nearly always do this quick feedback form on everything that we do, which is a kind of thumbs up, thumbs down. So what you liked, what could have been improved. And then we normally ask 2 questions. In this case, I've put, what have you learned and gained from today? Is there anything you will do differently? We normally ask a future-facing question, because quite often what you want to know is, especially with knowledge mobilization, what are people taking away from this to take forward? But also here we quite often are, and in this section here, we quite often put like a little Likert scale and get people to mark something. So we've got a little bit of quantitative feedback we can build up over time. And then a lot of our clients use a reflective impact log, which is a place where people who are actually running something, so you're actually delivering the knowledge mobilization strategy, you're actually doing the research impact work, that you would record your own reflections, and that would really start to help shape, okay, where might we shore up some evidence here. So this is the starting point, and it's great to do that, setting out outcome maps and thinking about data and evidence, but there's still quite a lot of challenges. And I suppose what we've tried to do in the approach at Matter of Focus is pull these challenges together. So we want to be complexity informed. We don't want to pretend that things are simple when we know they're complex. We want to really build in what we understand about evidence to action and how people use knowledge in a meaningful way. We want to think about outcomes, not just as things we tick off, but as things that we work towards. And we've built a flexible software tool because we found that people really like doing outcome mapping and they really like setting out there how they think they're going to make an impact. But when it came to tracking, they really struggled to have the right tools to be able to track. We used to give people a spreadsheet with risks and assumptions that they generated with outcome map, with data and evidence. And unless they were real spreadsheet fans, and there are some of those people in the world, I've heard, then they just struggled. And I think the other thing we're all struggling with in this work is trying to make things complex enough to reflect the complexity of the worlds in which we're working in, but not too complex as to be overwhelming, and then simple enough to be practical and doable, but not so simple that they're crass, that we're just making claims that are really we're not able to substantiate. So the purple hash area here is almost like we're all bumbling around here trying to get something that's simple enough and complex enough, and we probably oscillate up and down a little bit before we get to the right spot. So we've built Outnav as the way of really embedding this way of working. So what I want to do now is just share with you a few screenshots from Outnav, explain to you how it works, and then Mariev's going to say a little bit about what she's been doing with it, and then we'll go on to questions. So Outnav is like SatNav, but for outcomes. So it's Outcome Navigator. And it starts off, the things that I've already talked through to you will all be familiar now. So it starts off with outcome mapping, and you'll see here these are the formal headings. This is this is one of Mariev's examples. So you see we have activities, engagement, reactions, etc. along the top here. And here she's talking about all of the work of the Knowledge Mobilization Office in this particular outcome map. So it looks like that in Outnav. And we have some templates that we've developed. So this is like a sort of typical community engagement strategy. We build relationships between researchers and communities. We provide opportunities for mutual learning. So these are researchers, community members, community organizations. How do they feel we can work together? This is relevant and important. We trust each other. What do they learn and gain? They understand each other's perspectives. They learn about the issues they want to address. So normally these sorts of initiatives are focused on an issue, aren't they? We gain insight into research, perspectives and ways of working, and we build lasting partnerships. What they do differently: work together to address issues that matter to us, create products, projects and outputs that demonstrate our work, identify further opportunities for collaboration. What difference does it make? Communities are more resilient and able to address the issues that matter to them because they've got these skills. Researchers are more attuned to the issues that matter to people and communities. More resources flow from institutions to communities, and there's mutual respect between universities and their communities. So that's like a template, if you like, for a typical knowledge at mobilized community engagement strategy that you might then adapt to be specific to your own particular way of working. We've also got a typical research to action template, which is we conduct research on a topic, we create partnerships with key organizations, and we carry out knowledge mobilization activities. So I'm not going to go through this one, but I'll share the slide so you can see it in detail later. But basically, you know, leading to these sort of impacts around research being used to influence policy and practice, policy and practice changes, reflecting research findings, people continue to use research, and the problems that the research intends to address are influenced in some way in policy or practice. So that's a typical one. A more kind of focused policy influencing one might focus more particularly on policymakers. Again, I'm not going to read through it, but so you can just see how how you would start to build up outcome maps around different kinds of ways of working. And having built an outcome map, the next thing you do is plot pathways. So in the Knowledge Mobilization Office from University of Ottawa, these are the pathways, because these are the key things that office is doing. So there's one around grants and awards, one around knowledge dissemination. So this would be for using it at that more strategic level to really understand the work of that particular function of the organization, would be to use it like this. And more at the kind of individual researcher level, you might have, you know, a policy influencing pathway and a practice influencing pathway, or you might have one that's focused on a particular policy area, or focused on a particular community, or focused on a particular piece of work that you've been doing. Basically what you do is you drill down into the key things that you want to measure and set those out. And then you pull out from the contextual analysis what are the key risks and what are the assumptions that you're working on. And the reason to do this is because, of course, when you set out your outcome map or your pathway like this is the kind of ideal, this is what you want to happen, isn't it? This is what you intend to happen, that there's going to be improved policy and practice. And the way you bring it into the real world is by saying, well, why might it not happen? What are the risks? And what do we actually need to be in place? So, you know, for a lot of research, there's assumptions that people see research knowledge as useful, that partnership approaches are going to be helpful, that you know and can reach the right people, that audiences receive the messages as intended, you know, that whole misuse and misinterpretation issue. So you really set these out, and these help to clarify what sorts of things you might collect feedback on, and also how you might talk about the feedback you do collect. And then in Outnav, what you can do is you can drill down into each of your stepping stones. So this is the who with column. Well, how are we going to know we've got the researchers we think, or we've got an activity log and we're going to describe the researchers who are engaged with the community? What about the community members? Okay, we're going to look at our activity log. We're going to say something about the age and localities of the community members, because, you know, some people are targeting particular age groups. The number of community members engaged, the people attending more than one activity. These are the sorts of things that might be useful to know. And then again with community organizations. So what Outnav lets you do is actually pull a link to these data sources against your outcome map and say, okay, if we want to understand this change, this is where we're going to look. And then what you can do is you can write a summary. So you do a bit of analysis in a box. And you look at the data and you say, so let's say that from the previous page, okay, so let's look at the activity log, and in here you would start to type, oh, we have engaged 35 members of the community from this, this, and this, you know, 70 to 25-year-olds or whatever. You can add a graph or a photo or other ways of visualizing your data. And then what you do in Outnav is you make two assessments. One is how well are you progressing towards the outcomes or impact that matter to you. And the other one is how confident are you in your evidence? So you start to build up a picture across your pathway of, you'll see the color coding here. So the traffic lights is progress, and then the strength of color is how good the evidence is. So you're really building up across the pathway where you think your data and evidence is stronger or weaker, as well as how you're progressing. And then Outnav lets you share your progress or your project with people inside and outside your organization. So you can share works in progress, so you can discuss, actually, of course, the fact it's a virtual tool has reached a whole new level of relevance recently. And you can also report straight from your from the tool on different levels and different aspects of the work that you've done. So just kind of to summarize, we offer this Outnav as a software tool, but we also offer consultancy support, because as you'll have seen in those slides, you know, we normally do outcome mapping with people, and we normally spend some time really figuring out what data and evidence they need and helping them get to a good place where they can get good value out of Outnav. And then we offer some kind of training and events as well, including we've been doing a research impact school, and one of the modules of the research impact school actually helps you set out an outcome map for your work and identify the data and evidence that you would need. So I'm going to stop sharing. I've got a couple of concluding slides I'll maybe put up right at the end, Michael, because they're mainly resources for people if they want to find them. But just, Marie-Eve, would you like to say something about the work we've been doing together?
Sure. Thank you, Sarah. So I'm the Knowledge Mobilization Advisor at the University of Ottawa. For those who don't know, so the University of Ottawa has been, well, we just published and put together a Knowledge Mobilization institutional strategy. And part of my role is to implement this strategy and also evaluate and monitor its activities. And so just as a backup story, I think I listened to Sarah's talk at the Research Impact Summit this summer, and I thought her Outnav tool seemed really interesting, and I really liked her approach. So I contacted her and asked her if you know, we could talk about her tool, and because I wanted to find a way to track some of you know, our strategy's impact. So she was really kind enough to let me kind of play with the tool, and I have to say it really helped me, because I had done like a logic model for the strategy activities, but having, you know, using the tool to really map not only you know, the activities with the people and the outcomes and everything, but also mapping it with the indicators and the data sources. It really helped me to organize myself and organize how I was gonna track all of these outputs and indicators, measures. So yeah, I think it's a really interesting and helpful tool for that. I didn't get the chance to really explore it in a kind of collaborative way, which I think you know, I see with Sarah's examples that it could be a benefit for me. It was like just me, myself, and I kind of figuring out, you know, how I could use the tool for the tracking. So I didn't really engage with anyone, which I think, you know, I should probably do. But yeah, I didn't get a chance to. Yeah, and I also really enjoyed the report function. So, you know, we all want to kind of track, but it's also really important to report on the things that we're finding. So I think it's interesting and important that we have that way of summarizing, putting some text and also some visuals, and then just clicking a button and it just appears as a report that you can share. I think that's really useful and interesting. So I really, you know, after using it, I used it more as an institutional evaluation perspective, and I still think it has potential for that, but I do see more value as you know, for researchers who are doing research projects and engagement and want to develop these outcomes map and indicators and work with their partners. I think it has more value to that actually, but yeah, so I mostly, you know, that's kind of my experience. I'd like to, you know, answer any questions that people have.
Thank you, Marie-Eve. And also, can I just say that Marie-Eve did an amazing job on her own in the room. I think she'd already done a bit of the thinking on the logic models, so it kind of fitted quite easily with where she was thinking. But you know, it's quite tough just to do it like that. So yeah. Well
Thank
done.
you both very much. What an incredibly dynamic resource. I have a couple questions already, and I invite people to add them to the chat. The first one was a bit more of a process question, and I was going to interrupt you, Sarah, but I didn't want to cut you midstream. From Heather, what whiteboard platform do you use? I looked.
We're using Miro, M-I-R-O. It's why it works for us. It's quite intuitive. You stick Post-its on. And also you can invite people in without them having to log in. You can just literally invite them to click on a link and they're there. And, you know, we're quite often running workshops with groups of people that might include volunteers or, you know, like we just don't necessarily know when we go to a workshop who is there. So yeah, we're really enjoying Miro. I think it's got a lot of potential. You can also stream directly into Miro, but we don't. We use Zoom because we use breakout rooms and things. So we work across the two. I think it's a little bit challenging for people. I mean, sometimes we had a community member join on his phone and there was no way, you know, that he could work across two platforms. So the virtual environment is challenging, I think, for a lot of people.
And Marie-Eve has just posted a link to Miro in the chat. So that would be there, Heather. Sarah, there's a question for you. Hi, Sarah. I am a final year media production undergraduate student in Toronto. I became passionate about knowledge mobilization over the last 2 years, and I want to build a career around making knowledge more accessible. In your opinion, what is the best way to get started with working, well, see, it just jumped down on me, with working with knowledge mobilization? And does matter of focus accept volunteers? Fantastic, fantastic presentation. Thank you.
Well, feel free to email me about being a volunteer. I'm always open to a conversation. I mean, I think careers in knowledge mobilization in the public sector, there are people out there who are in like knowledge management, and some of those roles drift more into knowledge mobilization. But it's a little bit of a, and Michael, you probably got as much to say about this, or Marie-Eve, or a lot of the people on this call as me. But we tend to be a little bit on the sort of boundaries. Like it's not that easy to see a career with career progression. People tend to work, you know, slightly in like you work in a unit, don't you, Michael? And so do you, Marie-Eve. And I worked in a research center that had quite an outward-looking focus. And I know people who like, they're librarians and they work in the health service, but actually what they're doing is knowledge mobilization. So it's not that easy to say, here it is, here's the career and here's the progression. But I would just say, try and get some experience with people who are, you need great facilitation skills and you need good research skills. And if you just try and hone both of those, you'll be fine.
Thank you very much. And Valentina, I invite you to email me, mjohnny@yorku.ca. Since you're in Toronto, I can give you some insight and more so links about places. There's a few places that tend to post opportunities more so than others. I will read a question in the Q&A box that came in from David. A question for Sarah: how have you seen Outnav scale? I can see it working in a project, and clearly it works for a unit level group in a university. How does it scale for larger projects or for networks, which are made up of individual projects and participants?
Yeah, we've got a few different examples of that. So, I mean, there's a few organizations who use it for projects, but then also use it for strategy and track their strategies and more at that operational level. So that's the kind of simple answer. The more complex answers are, we ran a project with 14 carers organizations across the country, and they'd all applied to this fund, and they were all delivering the same fund. So they came together, they developed an outcome map that represented the work they were going to do. And what you can do in Outnav is you can, and decided on some key measurables. And then what you can do in Outnav is you can clone those. So they all got a clone of that, which meant they could add things to it, but they couldn't change the fundamental structure that they'd all agreed. So that, the people in this place would, I don't know, working with these sorts of people or doing something slightly differently, they could add that in. And then what you can do is then see how it plays out in those different places in similar and different ways. And then you can produce a report that aggregates some of that up, not automatically at the moment, I'm afraid. So that's one example. Another example is we've got a network of community health organizations who, at the network level, they developed an outcome map. How does community health make a difference to people in communities? A sector was quite beleaguered by funding cuts. So they agreed on, okay, this is the community health model. And then, there's quite disparate organizations in that, some of them working more in like green space, some of them working more in mental health or whatever. And they all built on that to tell the story of their own organization, but talking to some of the same outcomes. So those are the sorts of ways that it works more strategically and more collectively. Yeah, I hope that answers your question, but feel free to add a follow on if it doesn't.
Of course. I have two more questions in the queue. This one could be for both of you, actually. A question from Karen. I'm trying to understand the relative value and how you'd use it in an academic context for one, higher level administration, such as a university KMB unit or a faculty level, versus groups of researchers. The first may have relatively high level impacts they're trying to accomplish, which are less amenable to breaking down in this way, whereas researchers may find this overkill and need a lot of support to implement.
Marie-Eve, do you have anything you want to say to that question?
Yeah, I had thoughts about, although I do think that this could be helpful for researchers in their, research groups or working with others. Yeah, knowing researchers and how, they all have a lot on their plates, and having to learn to use a new tool and everything, it might be, I see that it could be challenging. And some of them actually probably use the other tools. I mean, it's possible. And so it might be difficult to change their ways if they're already kind of tracking their own thing in their own way. So I don't necessarily see yet. I think it would be more like a new way of, like, for those who are not doing it and are thinking about doing it and need a way, then we would of course need to offer some support into training them and using it and supporting them for sure. Like, I don't see it as something you can just give to people and they can just figure it out. Yeah. I don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah, I was going to say that it tends to be the sort of pioneering research centers who really want to demonstrate their impact, or people who have to demonstrate their impact, or the kind of stars that want to show what they're doing and want to show it in a robust way, that will find this useful. Like, it's definitely not something I would want that for people to have to comply with, because I don't think that's really not how it's been designed. It's just worth saying you can use it in slightly lighter and heavier ways. So there is a way of like summarizing at each of the step levels rather than drilling down into each of the stepping stones and not necessarily putting evidence in against all of them. So there's a sort of lighter touch way of using it, which is probably more suited to those kind of people. But I suppose in the end, like any evaluation tool, it's all about who is it for and why are you doing it. Like, you've got to have a real sense of, these are my audiences, this is why I'm doing it, and this is how it's going to help, because that's got to come first, hasn't it? And we all know what it's like in big institutions being told to comply with data systems that we don't really feel we understand what the point of them is. It's just not a good place to be. So yeah, that would be my take on that. That it's really for those initiatives where impact really matters and they really have to show it, where it's going to work.
Thank you very much. Two questions in the queue. The second one may be a bit of a follow-up to this, but I'll respect the order in which they came in. A question from Thane. Does Outnav integrate with CRIS or RIMS systems? Sorry for such a librarian question. So I guess it's around other systems integration.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so at the moment it doesn't integrate directly, but I suppose the people that we have who use some sort of client management systems or other sorts of data systems, what they would do is use those as sources of evidence. So you would create reports from those systems that become sources of evidence that you link to in Outnav. So that's how it works at the moment, which I suppose means that those, I mean, because in the end, Outnav is about kind of human interpretation of data. You would never feed it automatically anyway, because you'd always be doing your analysis on it. We are looking at a way with a current client we're working with, which is a big health and social care partnership, at a way of just linking more automatically to their data set, although there's quite a lot of issues around privacy and stuff. But yeah, so we can look at it, but on the whole, what people do is produce reports from those other systems and then use them as data sources in Outnav.
Thank you very much. I have a question here from Ruth, probably directed to Marie-Ève. I'm very interested in what Sarah has presented. However, I am not that clear on how Outnav is accessible to us as researchers. I see that it is a cloud-based software. As a U of Ottawa prof engaged in research groups, can Marie-Ève comment on whether U Ottawa is considering purchasing a site license?
So of course, when I began, collaborating with Sarah, we had that intention of looking at it and maybe piloting it in a way that eventually we could buy a license. Right now, though, and I've told Sarah that University of Ottawa needs to have licensed software that are bilingual, and so Sarah is aware that of that, and there's a bit of work that might need to happen there, but yeah, it's a possibility. I think, Ruth, we could probably talk about it and maybe see what's possible. But I can't. I don't have the end on the money, so we need to talk with higher people to kind of make a case as to how we could work as a license for U Ottawa. So there's needs to be a bit of work there. But if I can have some champions helping me out at the university, I'm glad to chat about it.
And also, Marie-Ève, Steve Montague, who's one of the contribution analysis specialists, whose work we've built on is at University of Ottawa, and he said he'd be really happy to help in any way. So, and he might be able to support people. Like when you're thinking about supporting people with the method, he might be. Anyway, we can have this conversation elsewhere, but it's like how to build the kind of case. I think is an interesting problem that we all need to solve if we're going to do this work better. So.
Yeah, and I think, Sarah, you mentioned as well that right now it's project based. There's institutional, but with only a minimum, like a minimum number of license, and so there's no options available right now with really institutional wide, unlimited way.
Yeah, there are.
There are. Okay.
Yeah, there's enterprise licenses. Yeah, there are. Yeah.
Okay. Cool.
This dovetails well. There's a question in the Q&A from Barb. I would be very interested in piloting Outnav for one of my projects, assuming there's a subscription fee. Now, perhaps, Sarah, this is an opportunity to talk broadly about the fee structure. Marie-Ève, just to let you know, Barb is also in Ottawa, and I don't know if that is University of Ottawa or Carleton, but I also think there'd probably be an opportunity to Barb to follow up a bit more directly, but maybe just a higher level question around the levels of fee structure and engagement for people. Thank you.
Yeah, sure. So we sell Outnav on an outcome map basis, not on a user basis, because we decided early on that actually you need whoever is in your team on. There's no point in restricting people. Let's just focus on outcome area. So we sell it. So at the basic level, if you bought for one project, if you bought an outcome map, it's £850 British pounds a year. But there's various other ways of thinking about it. So the institutional wide one is obviously as you scale up, it becomes cheaper per unit. So for example, the example I gave earlier of the community health organizations, they bought a group subscription, which 20 organizations are part of. And so they all have their own version, they all have their own outcome map within a group subscription. So there's a few different ways of working around it. We normally have a conversation with people about what's going to work best for them, but you might also be interested in, we're running this research impact school starting in March, which is going to take people through a sort of onboarding process and give them a 6-month subscription as a trial. So if you go to our website, you can find that, or email me. My final slide has got a kind of link to, you can download the headings for free if you want to just have a go with the headings and see how where it gets you. There's some training and events. We do some free webinars. Then there's this group subscriptions. There's a bit more reading that I've put all on this slide. So I'll share it in, afterwards, and feel free to get in touch if you want to discuss it or have a look at those options.
I would ask if each of you, whether it's slide based or if you want to put your contact information in the chat.
I can do that now. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Sarah. But that being said, again, I'll reiterate, the webinar is going to be posted live, and I believe the slides will be made available as well. We can facilitate getting them emailed out to the participants that signed up, so you'll have anytime access. There we go. Marie-Ève and Sarah have placed their email addresses in the chat. I don't have any more questions queued up. I give everybody credit for helping me keep on time. I'll pass it back to Sarah and Marie-Ève for any final comments, and we'll close things down on time.
Well, thank you all very much for coming. I love talking to a group of people interested in knowledge mobilization. So it's really nice, and please do get in touch, or however you'd like to interact in the future. I'd be really interested to hear from any of you. And thank you for facilitating and for setting this up, to Connie and Michael.
Yes, thank you for the opportunity. And so for the University of Ottawa folks online, if you want to talk more about this, don't hesitate to reach out to me. And hopefully we can start having discussions in Research Impact Canada as to a network and how this tool could be useful as well.
Great way to end it, Marie-Ève. Thank you very much. Yes, for everybody on the line, Research Impact Canada, as Canada's knowledge mobilization network, we try to facilitate this space to allow for these conversations, both in terms of learning, but sharing space as well. There will be other webinars taking place over the winter term. Thanks everybody for your time. This has been hugely valuable, and I invite people to follow up as needed, but stay safe, keep well, and we look forward to connecting up again soon. Thank you.